program is for educational purposes only. The content is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any diseases, nor is it intended to take the place of your primary care physician. The statements in this program have not been evaluated by the FDA. Testimonials are shared as individual experiences of the individual. Results vary and may not be typical. We do not make any claims regarding health or income. As an empowered individual, you do have options available. We are honored to continue to share the teachings of a founding father of the science of epigenetics, Dr. Joel Wallach, Bachelor of Science in Plant and Soil Sciences, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, 4 postdoctorates in pathology, naturopathic doctor. This program is for educational purposes only. The content is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any diseases, nor is it intended.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Daily with Doc and Becca. And there's no Doc here today. There's no Becca here today. But we do have a very special guest who I will be bringing on the screen in just a little bit. My name's Coach AJ, and I'm filling in for Becca Dukes today, who's traveling. And we have our audience. Thank you for being with us on Rumble and Facebook and YouTube and X and everywhere else that you are watching the show. Thank you very much. I am pleased to have Jonathan Emord with us. Jonathan is a constitutional attorney. I'm hoping that is a good terminology to describe him as, but he's certainly a gentleman who has worked his way through many courts. He's a prolific writer, and he is a big friend to longevity. My introduction doesn't do him any justice, but I'd love to bring him on the screen. Jonathan Emord, everybody, welcome and join me in welcoming Jonathan Emord to the screen. Jonathan, thank you for being with us on Daily with Doc today.
You're welcome.
Thanks for taking your time out of your day. I know that you squeeze us in amongst a lot of other things that you had going on. So I really appreciate you joining us.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So, where to start with you? You have worked with Dr. Joel Wallach. You've known him for many years. Tell us a little bit about how you met Dr. Wallach.
Well, I believe I first became familiar with Dr. Wallach in the early 1990s. So it's a little bit hard for me to remember all the details back then, but I was contacted, I think, by Steve Wallach, maybe by Dr. Wallach directly, and they wanted me to undertake a review of their labeling and their compliance with food and drug law. And then that grew into a relationship that led to many actions against the FDA over the years, and a lot of struggles and a lot of fights with problems that arose that we overcame. So it was a good opportunity to be the dragon slayer for for Dr. Wallach. And of course, Dr. Wallach is himself a truly remarkable pioneer and scientist who is well known throughout the entire industry for being really at the forefront of the nutrition revolution in America.
Okay, and why you? What were your credentials at that time that qualified you as someone to be sought after to help identify irregularities in labeling, or what was your experience at that point?
Well, I think most of my clients at the time hired me because I was a fighter, and most of the bar would just lie down and take whatever the government would dish out without challenging it. So there's quite a bit of problems there. You know, the Food and Drug Administration is notorious for censoring nutrient disease information, has for many decades. And the Food and Drug Bar, is oftentimes comprised of lawyers who don't want to offend the agency, but rather want to work with it. I didn't care. I came from a different entire background. I came to Washington when I was very young. I was came into law school when I was, I think, 19, 18. I went to undergraduate school at 16. So 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I was 20. And I got out of law school at 23. And then I was hired by the Reagan administration to work at the Federal Communications Commission. And I was heavily involved with First Amendment issues there and the deregulation of radio and television. And then I left the FCC and went into private practice as a federal litigator against the government. So I was litigating on different issues against the Federal Communications Commission and in the administrative courts and so forth. So I think what appealed to Dr. Wallach, the reason why they hired me initially, was that I was probably one of the few lawyers that actually had sued the government. And then in addition, that had a track record of success in defeating the government. So in most instances, probably 98% of the time, the government prevails in cases brought in civil courts against the government. But in my career, I've had good fortune, knock on wood, to beat them over and over again.
Why do you think that is? Just by not laying down or knowing your stuff, or what do you think that combination might be?
Well, I'm driven by a passion for the First Amendment, for the Constitution. Ever since I was a young boy, I've really loved the American Constitution, its defense of individual liberty, the uniqueness of our heritage. Here we are on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. That is perhaps the most remarkable political document in the history of the world. The second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence is unique in all the world. No other nation on earth since or before that time stated as its fundamental creed that all men are created equal, that all are born equal, and that they are endowed by their creator, by God, with certain unalienable rights, not government, endowed by God, not government. And that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the governments are instituted among men to protect the rights of the governed. That's the very purpose of the government. And that just governments derive their power, their just powers, from the consent of the governed. Those four cardinal principles of the American Republic exist nowhere else on earth. We are unique in that regard. That is our legacy of liberty. But as George Washington explained, we would never have that liberty to count on unless we fight for it. We have to continuously fight for it because it's in the interests of those who govern to have more power and to seize power and to violate rights to pursue their agenda. So unless we defend our liberties and fight for them, we will lose them. And that has been the history of our country. The remarkable history of our country is that over and over again, we've expanded the scope of liberty and defense of liberty. And we have experienced far few instances in which there's been a contraction of rights. And when there has been, we've fought vigorously against it. That's what happened with the Food and Drug Administration. It took on the role of violating the First Amendment as if it never had to explain why in the first place it chose to do so, despite the Constitution. So you can't say anything about a product affecting a disease, even if it does, if it's a nutrient, unless the government pre-approves it. That's called a prior restraint. The Founding Fathers prohibited that under the First Amendment. It never should have come into existence. So I worked at the Cato Institute. I was a vice president of the Cato Institute. I wrote a paper called Contrived Distinctions, the Doctrine of Commercial Speech in First Amendment Jurisprudence, that got quite a bit of circulation. Maybe Dr. Wallach read that. I don't know. But I argued against the whole paradigm that was designed by the Supreme Court to defend the expansion of the administrative state and its violation of our rights. In the case of the FDA, violation of our First Amendment rights. So Dr. Wallach is a strong advocate of the Constitution. He loves the Constitution. He's a great American who believes in the founding principles of this country. And so we hit it off right away because that's what I'm about. I've had the good fortune in my career of choosing who to represent. I don't represent parties who seek ends that I disagree with. I just don't do it. So I've had the privilege of representing parties that fight for liberty, and that gives me the chance to fight in the courtroom for them, and that's what I've done for over 42 years.
When you say liberty, so I've heard, and by the way, I have seen people like Ron Paul respect your intellect and your tact. But when you say the word liberty, are you referring to my right to do anything lawful, or my right to do anything lawful that does not infringe on someone else's right? In other words, if I had a finding and I honestly believed that toenail lint could heal a disease, is it my right, if I really believe that, to talk about that? I mean, what's your thought? Or is it just based on science? I mean, what does liberty allow me to say?
So Thomas Jefferson gave us the American definition of liberty. He wrote to Isaac Tiffany in 1834, 37, and he said, rightful liberty is unobstructed action according to will within limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. He said, I did not say within the limits of the law, because the law is often but the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of an individual. That is the most beautiful definition for that term liberty, and the most accurate definition of liberty within the American system of jurisprudence. So what does it mean? Does it mean that you can commit fraud? No, because you're violating the rights of someone else. You can't defraud someone by trying to sell them something that doesn't do at all what you say it does. But by the same token, under our First Amendment, remember, the First Amendment deprives the government, as James Madison explained in the first Congress, it deprives the government of any power whatsoever over speech and press. It just denies the government the power to regulate or pass legislation to block it. And does that mean that all speech is protected? No. Why? Because if speech is used as a weapon to deprive another person of their rights or of their equal rights, then that speech is actionable. So, for example, if I cry fire in a crowded theater, I've just violated your right because I've caused a stampede. People are taking away your liberty and maybe your life by their actions in response to my false, fraudulent statement that there's a fire in the theater when there isn't. So that then is actionable against me. Did I speak? Yes, I said fire. What motivated me is irrelevant because my speech became a weapon. In fact, when speech merges with action, it is then actionable against by the government. But most questions dealing with the government do not necessarily have to involve speech. So we look at actions, right? So we look at the product that you're producing, and we ask the question, what foundation do you have for that product? But that question is not the appropriate question of government. Why? Because the burden of proof under the First Amendment is against the government. The government has to prove your statement is false. You don't have to prove your statement is true. Interesting, right? What that means is that the whole system for regulation of speech by the FDA and by the FTC is unconstitutional because in every instance, the administrative agencies don't start their action based on proof that what you said was false. They start their action by demanding that you prove your statement true. Not only just true based on what reasonable people would conclude, but true to a conclusive degree. And conclusivity in matters of speech is almost impossible because speech is evolutionary and because speech is subject to debate. Almost any proposition you make in politics, law, science is going to be open to debate. Does that mean that you should be deprived of your speech unless the only things you have to say, limiting the only things you have to say to those that are conclusively true? No. Under the First Amendment, the burden of proof is on the government to prove definitively that what you said was false. Not only that, it shouldn't be actionable unless it causes injury. If you tell me a lie and it is of no consequence, why should you be prosecuted? If you tell me a lie that induces me to take an action and cause me injury, then you should be open to prosecution. So this is the way you reorient the law to match the framers' intent, the founding principles that underlie the Constitution and our rule of law in America.
Given that interpretation, why then submit at all to the courts, or why acquiesce to their system if you think that the system is not built correctly? Let's say that.
Well, I think the original system is. So in other words, Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers explained why federal judicial review is necessary of federal law. Why? Because we have a system that is a mixed constitution where each branch of government has separate powers, and that is to ensure that no single individual is possessed of both legislative, executive, or legislative and judicial, or legislative, executive, and judicial power. James Madison defined that in the Federalist Papers as the very definition of tyranny. He relied on Montesquieu, a French philosopher, who explained in his Spirit of the Laws why there needed to be a separation of powers in government. And so why then do we submit ourselves to a judiciary or the rule of law, in other words? Because the courts have to be an ultimate arbiter of conflicts related to whether the law applies in a particular case or whether you have a legal defense. All of these things have to be adjudicated under the constitutional system that we've developed. And I think it's the best system in the world when it's appropriately and following the founding fathers' intentions. This whole thing, systems for construction of the Constitution, I wrote about in a book called Freedom, Technology, and the First Amendment. And that was my first book a billion years ago, 1999 or something like that. There is an enormous ideological foundation for our concept of liberty and rights. And the uniqueness of the American system is that, unlike any other place in the world, you have rights that are from God, not government, so they can't be taken away by government. So, for example, our members of Longevity who live in Canada, let's take the Canadian example. In Canada, your rights are said to come from Parliament. Just like that's the position of the English and British. So when your rights come from Parliament, Parliament can choose circumstances in which those rights can be taken away. So during the COVID epidemic, they took people's rights away. They took people's rights to practice their religion away. They took people's right to speak if they were critical of the government away. They took people's rights to go to business, to work away, unless they were vaccinated. They did all these things. Similar things were attempted here. But they ultimately ran into problems here because in our courts, unlike in the Canadian courts, we have our rights independent of what the government does. In Canada, the court simply ask, well, did Parliament exercise emergency powers at the request of the Prime Minister? Yes. Did they suspend these rights? Yes. Well, you have no case. Sorry, you have to suffer. In this country, that could not happen. They tried very hard to do it, but and they took away several people's rights. But ultimately, there was vindication in the courts, and our system returned to protect the sovereignty of the American people. In our country, uniquely in all the world, we are sovereign. We are the power, source of power. When government violates the Constitution, it presumes itself through the individuals in government to possess sovereignty that we don't have. That's not true. Everything in government does must be by representation or subject to limitations, if not by representation, that are strictly designed to limit the powers of those who are in government. We have a written constitution, it was first unique to the United States when it was adopted in 1787, when it was proposed in 1787, adopted in 1791. It's unique because it was written, but also it was unique in that no powers exist in the federal government except those expressly contained in the Constitution. All other powers are reserved to the states. All rights that are not articulated in the Bill of Rights are reserved to the people under the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution. So it's truly, we really, in this 250th year of the Declaration of Independence, we should all be celebrating, we should be thanking ourselves, our country over and over and over again for the great privilege of being born into a country that stands for principles that are based on the protection of our rights. It's remarkable. And people take it for granted. And a lot of people, because they take it for granted, ignore its significance until they go into another country. Try to live in another country, and you'll soon discover that over time, even in a friendly European country, that it's nowhere like this place when it comes to your freedom to speak or your rights, and your right to property and your right to do with your own property what you would. Not that that is always protected here, but it certainly isn't protected in Europe. So it's, that's why I do what I do, because that's my obsession. My obsession is the Constitution of the United States, the intellectual principles that underlie the Constitution. I spent my whole life studying it, and digging deeper and deeper and deeper into its roots, and mastering the wisdom that came from these people. The founding fathers truly were unique people, remarkable in their command of rights theory, which was new. The rights movement arose in opposition to the Hanoverian kings in England in the late 1600s and then into the 1700s. It was the refutation of the divine right of kings, and it arose because of John Locke's second treatise on government in part, but also before that time, under the divine right of kings, only the king has rights. And you may have rights by leave of the king, but the king is God's emissary on earth, and he possesses all rights. Well, in that system, you're just a slave. The interesting thing is the roots and expansion of slavery is entirely predicated upon deprivation of rights, of course. But once you make this remarkable proposition, as in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, the reason why it's earth-shattering, quite literally, is that Thomas Jefferson took the position that all men are created equal. Did he mean by that only men? No. The understanding both in the second treatise on government and at the time Jefferson wrote it was that men meant people. And did he mean it only to apply to white people, as is oftentimes said by revisionists in their history? No. And how do we know that? Because there was a 134 word paragraph in his original draft of the Declaration of Independence in which he condemned George III for bringing the institution of slavery to America, and said that slavery was an abomination and deprivation of rights. So when he said all men are created equal, he was quite literally saying all men. Now, isn't that strange for someone who owned slaves? It is. But is that shows that there is an aspiration to a better world. And even all of the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson included, condemn the institution of slavery even when they had slaves. And you ask yourself, well, how can that be? because the economy, the world in which they live, created by George III, was a world in which agriculture could not be ever profitable without human bondage, without slave labor. If you liberated all of your slaves and you were a large plantation owner, you would suffer massive debt. And most of the founding fathers did by the time they died. But when they died, they manumitted or freed their slaves. Because for example, when George Washington died, Martha was still living. And he wrote in his will that all the slaves would be manumitted when Martha died, because he knew if he manumitted them at his death and she still lived for many years after, that she would be absolutely poverty stricken and would go bankrupt. And he didn't want that to happen. But he knew slavery was wrong. And so he had it all manumitted. Is this an imperfect world? Yes.
Yeah, it's a little imperfect because my rights end where when yours are impinged upon. But I'm with you, Jonathan. I do understand what you're saying. No one is perfect. You've given us a ton of food for thought already, but back to our friends, and this is our 30th year at Longevity. So, being a decade birthday in time with America, I guess there's something slightly at least poetic about that. Jonathan, what is the significance as far as the science goes, if you understand, and clearly you do, because you wouldn't have been able to articulate it if you did. What is the benefit of folic acid, and why now do you have influencers who are beating up folic acid when it has saved so many and saved suffering from so many more? Please explain to us what the significance and the need to have folic acid, and if there's a difference, what that difference might be, and the significance in congenital how does it benefit human life?
So I'm not a scientist. Dr. Wallach is. Dr. Wallach could give you the best explanation, but I can tell you this. So one of the primary claims that we first sued the Food and Drug Administration over included the folic acid neural tube defect claim. We had a claim that 800 micrograms of folic acid taken by women of childbearing age before they become pregnant, absolutely critical, reduces the risk of having a neural tube defect birth, that is spina bifida or anencephaly, by as much as 80%. And what is that? That's when a baby is born with a spinal cord outside of their spinal cavity there, or when their brain is outside of their skull. Now, the babies born like that would oftentimes die, but when they didn't die, they would have oftentimes horrific existences where they would have to go through surgery after surgery after surgery, and would, for the rest of their lives, be limited in what they could do. And then also, they would frequently die before they reached old age. They would die in their 20s or 30s. It's really a horrible birth defect, but it's preventable. And folic acid deficiency is the causative reason for the disease. So you ask yourself, why then did the federal government suppress it, deny it the right to communicate that? It's true. It's provable. The CDC was telling doctors to tell patients about this. And yet the FDA refused to allow it on the label or in the labeling of folic acid supplements. So we sued FDA over that, and we presented massive amount of evidence supporting the proposition scientifically. And the government really didn't argue that the science was mistaken. What the government said, and it's driven by protection for the drug industry. It didn't want people at that time. This is a novel situation. It was in the Pearson versus Shalala case. Never before was FDA's censorship power questioned under the First Amendment, as it was in this case. But they didn't argue to the court that they censored it because they were complying with the First Amendment. They said that the First Amendment doesn't apply to the FDA. They said the FDA's regulatory scheme is so complex that only brilliant scientists at the FDA can decide for the rest of us what science we can have and what we can't have. And if they give us access to information before we're mature enough in our education to understand it, we will abuse it. So they said, if you let people know that folic acid might reduce the risk of neural tube defect births, they might consume mass quantities of folic acid. They said if they did that, they might suffer from a vitamin B12 deficiency that would be masked in drug testing or blood testing because the folic acid would mask it. So they said we're gonna create B12 deficiency situations because people will be eating all this folic acid and it'll hide from doctors the B12 deficiency. So that was, of course, ridiculous set of arguments. And when I argued this before the Court of Appeals in the D.C. Circuit, they vigorously attacked the Justice Department attorney and expressed that they weren't persuaded at all that the First Amendment doesn't apply to the FDA, or that the American people are too stupid to understand science. Or I remember Patricia Wald, one of the three, she was brilliant, one of the three judges on the panel, saying, I shop at Whole Foods. And when I go to the Whole Foods aisle that has all these vitamins and minerals and so forth in it, some of the most sophisticated consumers in the food market are in that aisle. She said, I don't see that these people are stupid. They're asking rather sophisticated questions. And it shows me that they're fully capable of comprehending what we're hearing about today. And I don't understand why, when you put on a label that 800 micrograms of folic acid could reduce the risk of a neural tube defect birth by as much as 80%, that's somehow too complicated for women to understand. So anyway, we won the thing because regardless of whether the public understands truth, truth is fully protected under the First Amendment. I don't have to speak simply to have a government censor tell us you must break down your speech into very simple terms if you wish to communicate to the public. No, that's not what the First Amendment is about. It's to end censorship. Again, no power whatsoever over speech and press. So the court agreed and said that the FDA had to favor disclosure over suppression. It held its whole health claims review process unconstitutional, and it created what was called the qualified claims process directly as by order under the First Amendment. No statute existed for it. So the government would have to allow any claim that is scientifically backed to be communicated to the public if it could be rendered non-misleading with a qualification. The government could claim a speech was not approved. They could even put that in there. The government could say that the speech it disagrees with it to a degree, but it would have to state these things as a qualification and could not deny the public access to that information at the point of sale. So that was the court's decision. It was a landmark decision, and it overthrew a whole regime of censorship that the FDA had spent the better part of 3 decades constructing in detail, and they blew their minds. So for the better part of another half decade, they fought me in court over and over and over again, losing over and over and over again, to try to keep that old system in place, completely trying to ignore, undermine, and prevent adoption of this system. Why? Because the FDA is a patsy for the drug industry. The drug industry does not want competition, even competition from people understanding what elements in foods and nutrients can do to reduce disease or treat disease. They only want you to think that for disease, you got to go to the doctor. And when you go to the doctor, you need to get a pill. And that's the drug that they get approved by FDA. Now, that system has failed miserably. I mean, if we look at the statistics, I have them right here. I was on George Norrie the other night, and we went through
We
this,
heard.
and George was great. But I think it's shocking. This system has failed so miserably. When you look at this is all from the CDC, by the way. In 2023, 76.4%, 194 million Americans reported having one or more chronic conditions. 76.4% of the American population, 194 million people, have one or more chronic conditions. 59.5% of young people, 18 to 34, have one or more chronic conditions. 78.4% of people in their midlife years, 35 to 64, have one or more chronic conditions. 93% of older adults, 65 and older, have one or more chronic conditions. So it's 6 in 10 young people, 8 in 10 people in their middle age years, 9 in 10 older adults. And these chronic conditions are heart disease, cancer, stroke, and diabetes. They are all nutrition-related diseases. They're all a result of eating the wrong things. And
eating the wrong things and not putting the right things in.
right. And over the past 20 years, the prevalence of chronic disease in America has increased every year, every single year. No change in the trajectory, despite all the drugs that have been approved, despite all, and we've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drugs approved a year for these conditions. And we've not had any change. In 2016, the total direct health care cost to the US to treat chronic disease was $1.1 trillion. And 3 in 4 Americans have at least one chronic condition that had to be treated. 3 in 4. 4 out of every 5 Americans is taking some psychiatric treatment, some psychiatric drug. That blows your mind away, doesn't it? I mean, that's enough to make you want to take a psychiatric drug. But the point is, I mean, 65 to 70% of adult Americans are taking at least one prescription drug. 65 to 70% are taking one prescription drug. So, you know, it's just, it goes on and on. I mean, we spend $15,474 per capita on healthcare in the United States. Per person, every person per capita, we're spending $15,747. That's the highest in the world by far. And yet the health outcomes are abysmal. So the average life expectancy in America is 79 years. That's 50th in the world, behind Japan, Switzerland, and most of Western Europe. And the US spends the highest in the world on healthcare. 16.9% of our GDP is spent on healthcare. And we're 68th in the world in healthy life expectancy. So the rest of the world lives healthier longer than we do, just about. 65, 60, we're 68th in health life expectancy. This is according to America's health ranking system. You know, these are, in other words, the whole system of modern medicine has utterly failed in the most important areas. And that means we need a new paradigm. And that new paradigm really is one that must be driven by, it must be patient-centric, and it must be driven by the patient receiving full information at the point of sale in the market. It has to be a preventive model, not an emergency intervention model. The way, ever since World War II, we've had an allopathic medical system that is focused on emergency intervention. So you don't go to the doctor to prevent disease. You never go to the doctor and talk about your diet, exercise, and lifestyle annually to say, what do I need to do to tinker here and tinker there to get it better, to get it better, to get it better, so that I won't develop these diseases. No, we go along merrily and get the diseases. And then once we have the symptomology of it, we go to the doctor. And then they give us a treatment that is not really a treatment in most instances. It just masks the symptoms. And we get sicker and sicker and sicker. And then we die earlier, and we have longer periods of time when we're unhealthy. That doesn't have to be. And Secretary Kennedy has dedicated the administration to ending the chronic disease epidemic in America. But unfortunately, the FDA is not doing anywhere near what it needs to do to bring about that end of chronic disease. The only way it's going to end is if we get information at the point of sale. So we can have all this information about what nutrients and food do available to us so we can make the decisions. We need debate in that marketplace, open, so that the government doesn't censor everything. We need open, free market and ideas, information, so that when a mother's going to buy something for a child at the grocery store, she's able to say, okay, this child's this age, I should really be focusing on omega-3s and these other substances to make that sure that that child, selenium and other things, make sure that child has what it needs in order to develop properly. That's not what the typical person's doing when they're going to the grocery store. What are they asking? The typical person going to the grocery store isn't asking, what foods do I need to eat in order to maximize health outcomes? They're not asking that question. What they're asking is, what tastes good?
But Jonathan, even the people who are intentionally looking to eat vegetables of all colors and trying to what they've been told, and even by the new food pyramid, these folks are making the attempt, but our country doesn't have the quality of soil to produce the nutritious food that we think that we're getting.
So this is what Dr. Wallach taught us, and this is what, I forget the name of the doctor that he relied upon, who was an agricultural scientist. But you know, he was way ahead of his time, right? He was speaking about these things in the 70s and 80s, and that the soil was depleted of nutrients because of modern practice. There it is, Dr. William Albert. The soil was depleted of nutrients. Thank you, Albert. And that, you know, as a result, a tomato doesn't taste like a tomato did in 1930 into 2026. The reason is that there's a completely different nature to the soil and to farming techniques. And that has changed to a degree with regenerative farming, but it's all, you know, big pharma has kind of co-opted the term regenerative in instances where it actually is not regenerative farming. And by regenerative farming, I mean to treat the soil with nutrients and with substances that will decay into nutrients, and to develop it well with all sorts of things that are animal based and plant based and even insects, and then to develop plants in a local environment in which you are maximizing nutritional outcomes in the fruit of the plant, so that when you harvest this and you bring it to market promptly, then the person who consumes it is getting the maximum amount of folic acid, is getting the B vitamins and C and so on, rather than getting something that is just a hollow shell, essentially.
Devoid, yeah, most of it.
Yeah, and that's beyond our control, but it wouldn't be if we were fully educated. If we went to the grocery store and we knew that this tomato, which is mass produced or hydroponic or whatever, has this percentage of these specific nutrients, and we could compare it to a locally grown organic regenerative farming product that has a different nutritional profile with more nutrients in it, we'd at least be able to say, well, I don't want that plastic thing, I want this. But
That's novel. So you think we should label nutritional content on our fruits and vegetables?
Oh yeah, and this is not possible. It is possible, but it's not possible to make the claims that should come out of this, so that we can distinguish, you know, that says, hey, this has more lycopene in it than even your typical tomato. It's a concentrated lycopene product, and it has anti-cancer effects. You can't say that, but if you could, you know, if you've had a family history of one kind of cancer or another, and you want to maximize immune function and diminish the risk of cancer to avoid the necessity of, you know, some type of surgical intervention, you would say, okay, well, you know what? Our family has this history. I'm going to do what I think is best to reduce the risk of cancer. I'm not going to buy that product with a low lycopene percentage in it. I'm going to buy this one with a high percentage. And I'm going to also get the information at the point of sale about the cancer risk reduction effect. This one that has the trigger point for lycopene to reduce the risk of cancer. It has the quantitative amount per serving. It'll be able to say that. And so that requires the government to get out of the censorship business. I mean, if you went to if you went online to buy a nutritional product or whatever, and you were given full information, sure, there'd be problems. There are always problems. There's somebody's going to be fraudulent, whatever. But then there's all this prosecution that happens, both private and public, against fraud, and it's always going to happen. But you'd be far more informed and more interested in buying a product that would meet a nutritional profile that would be best for you. And then your healthcare practitioners would speak to this too. They'd say they'd be forced into it. They'd be forced into saying, okay, I'm not going to, I could recommend for you this drug, but as you found out for yourself, your type 2 diabetes can be controlled and completely eliminated by dietary modifications. Okay, let's talk about that. What are you eating? Okay, yeah, well, I would suggest this product. You know, that's what it would break down. So it would force the allopathic medical model into the integrative medicine model, where doctors would no longer be talking about crisis management. They'd be talking about everyday interventions that you can use to reduce your risk of disease, or if you have a disease, to reduce the severity of it, or maybe even eliminate it like type 2 diabetes in its entirety. And this requires a whole change. And this has to be the FDA changing. And by the way, the whole administrative state, truth be told, is unconstitutional. There's no provision in the Constitution to delegate the power of the legislature or the judiciary or the executive branch to an independent repository. In fact, like we said before, the very notion of that delegation, James Madison said, was the very definition of tyranny. We have an agency, the Food and Drug Administration, typical of over 250 different agencies of the government. And it has combined legislative and executive power. And that's unconstitutional under the non-delegation doctrine, which was at the heart of what the founding fathers believed in. The Congress has to answer for everything. We elect them to do that. They can't delegate away their power to some people we don't elect and who are not answerable to us, to make these profound decisions that affect the economy massively, that affect our health, our lives.
What about our monetary system?
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's a total disaster.
Just checking. Phyllis, Andy, I'm going to bring you on the screen. What kind of question do you have for our knowledgeable friend?
Well, first, this is truly a revolutionary topic and very timely. I know we all appreciate it so much, what you're passing along. Sandwa on Rumble says, I love to hear these constitutional sovereignty topics. And Olga on YouTube says, government exists to punish the evildoers, which sadly is no longer the case. We've got a question from Yvonne on YouTube. She asks, what can we do to help on our side take away the FDA's power to remove nutritional supplements from the market?
So it's a very timely question, because something has actually been done that is quite remarkable. At the end of February of this year, scientists, certain political people, business people in the nutrition space, and also in the healthcare space, physicians and scientists all met in Phoenix, Arizona, for a 3-day conference. We were present there. I'm the general counsel of the Alliance for Natural Health. Dr. Robert Burkirk is a really brilliant nutrition scientist and environmental scientist, is the head of the Alliance for Natural Health. They sponsored the event, and portions of it were in secret so that these corporations could explain to us the adverse effects that they were experiencing from government regulations, and what they would do in the absence of this censorship, and how much information they would put out, all that sort of thing. Anyway, the upshot of it was a consensus statement that's truly remarkable. You can see it at arizonastatement.org. I would urge everybody, it's free of charge, to sign up in favor of it, to endorse it. Why is that important? As you'll see it when you read this statement, it explains the principles that we've been talking about today, the constitutional principles, and then it explains specific actions that need to be taken all across the board to align the law with those principles and make us sovereign again in health freedom and enable us to control our own biological destinies and have enough information to do it without government interference or suppression. So by signing this thing, you are enabling us to produce what we hope will be over 1 million signatures that we'll then use in persuading members of Congress and the White House to adopt the specific reforms that we're talking about. And those reforms will free us. Now, is this the only thing that we need to do? No, we're going to have to sue as well. And we are. We're suing the government right now in multiple cases in an effort to expand our freedom and protect it and expand our rights protection in these areas. But this statement is, once you read it, you'll say, wow, that thing is truly remarkable. Verkerk and I wrote the statement, but it was a consensus statement. All the scientists, all the business people, all of the particular people who are physicians and others who are involved in this integrative medicine and all that, who were at the event, all agreed, unanimously agreed to the principles and to the actions. So I would urge everybody to sign it. I go on that webpage. It's arizonastatement.org. Read the thing. If you agree with it, sign your name to it. There are already, I think, over 10,000 people have signed it, and we haven't promoted it. It's just word of mouth from the group that was there, and then also, some public appearances that we've made. But I think the more people we tell about this and the larger the universe, we want to get 1 million signatures. We want to be able to go into members of Congress and say, hey, look, this is, there are 1 million people, there are X number of people in your jurisdiction, your state or your district who signed on to this and want to see this to happen. We want to see if you'll sponsor or co-sponsor this bill to help do that, to take away the FDA's power to censor or whatever, to expand the universe of available integrative healthcare modalities, innovation in medicine, ending the monopoly, the drug monopoly in this country over both health information and access to the market. So if we do that, we will have the tools necessary to end the chronic disease epidemic in America. And only if we do that. But it's that kind of massive reform that it's going to take. And thus far, though Secretary Kennedy has clearly made his position in favor of this idea of ending the chronic disease epidemic in America apparent, unfortunately, the FDA Commissioner McCary has not done anything to seriously advance the ball on that. And it's been a big disappointment. That's why we need to do this.
One more quick comment from Green Bear on.
I'd like to say something too when you're done there. Forgive me.
Green Bear on Rumble refers to our right to use the products of nature, such as plants, and he refers to Genesis 1:28-29, called sometimes the cultural mandate, which refers to our stewardship over nature on this planet. Andy, real quick.
Well, this episode, this interview with you is so important. I would like to see Youngevity make this available on a DVD, and the entire customer base gets a copy of it. You have covered so beautifully the Constitution, which is a favorite subject of mine. That came about years ago when I had to sue the Internal Revenue Service. And boy, did the Constitution come alive. I beat them, by the way. The Justice Department had to pay my legal costs. But Youngevity needs to take this episode, and when people buy products in some way, no cost, and get this information that you just put together. This is, talk about the founding fathers and their brilliance. So is this interview with you. I am so enjoying what I'm hearing, and this can't be lost with all the other promotions and merchandising and all that goes with business in general. I want to see Youngevity make this available to all of our customer base.
Jonathan, in case you didn't know, Andy was instrumental in making sure that Doc and Dead Doctors Don't Lie got syndicated in different markets. So it's Andy who was the spearhead of getting hundreds of different stations to air Dead Doctors Don't Lie.
Yeah, that Dead Doctors Don't Lie is one of the most remarkable things in our history, because no one ever spoke like that. Dr. Wallach spoke plainly, directly, and explained why you can't trust this allopathic system, why you can't go to the doctor and trust them to give you the right information. And the reason was that, really, and from my vantage point, it's very clear, you know, a doctor, this is how a doctor operates. This is the universe a doctor operates in. A doctor cannot give you any advice, even if he thinks it's in your best health interest, if it's going to be second guessed by Medicare or by his fellow practitioners or by the medical board. What does this really mean? Let me give you an example. Let's say you have a heart attack. Let's say that your heart attack is due in no small measure because you happen to be morbidly obese and you have a bunch of comorbidities that are leading you inevitably to a heart attack that's going to kill you. And the best thing that the doctor could do is not just give you a standard one-size-fits-all approach on, for example, physical therapy, X number of weeks, but to put you on a program that is holistic. It's going to change your diet. It's going to give you an exercise program, and it's going to give you a physical therapy program that's going to last for years, because it's a massive amount of transformation you're going to need in order to survive. And that whole thing is not Medicare covered. Only a small portion of the physical therapy and specific drugs, anticoagulants, whatever, are going to be covered. The rest of it is not covered. Now, that's bad enough, but it's worse, because if I, as a doctor, tell you of these other things and that you need more of it and recommend it to you and prescribe it to you, I cannot bill you for it. But in addition to not being able to bill you for it, I've just committed Medicare fraud. You say it's true. It's not fraud. You're doing what's in the best interest of the patient. It doesn't matter. If you deviate from the Medicare recommended care for a patient, you are opening yourself up to a challenge for Medicare fraud. When Medicare goes and audits your files, and they look, even when you didn't bill Medicare, if you treated a Medicare beneficiary and gave them advice that the government has not approved for the condition, you open yourself up to being sued by Medicare and demanding all the money Medicare gave you as a practitioner back to the government. And this keeps them in line. So they don't tell you all these things. They know it. A lot of them know this stuff. Not all of them are anywhere near as educated in nutrition as they should be, but they have no incentive to be, because all they can do to be safe for themselves,
give you a drug,
is to give you
do some jumping jacks.
Yeah, is to give you the standardized. I'll give you another one. So a lot of males have benign prostatic hyperplasia and an enlarged prostate. All right, I think if males live long enough, every single one of them gets this or gets prostate cancer. If you live long enough, you get prostate cancer. So anyway, all right. So maybe that's just desserts. But the point is, the treatment for benign prostatic hyperplasia is resection, which is surgery that is absolutely barbaric. Okay. and ruinous to the quality of life of the person. All right, you may even end up with a colostomy bag. You may end up, totally ruined. Okay, that is like the primary treatment modality. I represented a bunch of physicians who came up, this is many years ago, with a microwave treatment. What they would do is they would stick a probe in, and they would fry your prostate. And the frying of the prostate would reduce its size. And then that would relieve the pressure and would enable you to pee freely. And then it would also alleviate all of the conditions. Okay. So that methodology didn't involve surgery, didn't involve you having to stay in the hospital. And it was an outpatient procedure. All right. This is something that no male would want to undergo, that transurethral resection. You'd go for this thing instead. All right, well, guess what? Medicare wouldn't approve it. So here I had all this information that the baby boomers are going to be massive in the healthcare, demand on the healthcare. All these males are going to be demanding the surgery. The surgery costs, $30,000, $40,000 or more dollars, probably over $100,000 now. And the microwave treatment was $3,000. And in hospital, it was 5,000 something. Outpatient, it was 3,000. They would not approve it at all. They wouldn't know. And I said, look, the overall savings to the government is in the trillions of dollars.
Quality of life is much higher.
And the quality of life is higher. So the doctors who are getting a patient in, they learn about this, but they can't make it available to the patient. So they send them off for this brutal transurethral resection, when those patients, if they knew they could have a microwave treatment and walk in and go out the same day and just sit in the waiting room for an hour to see if they had some adverse reaction, and typically they wouldn't, they'd be done, as compared to being in the hospital for a week and actually being disabled for the rest of their life. Okay, so that's the kind of insanity when you have government political decision making ruling medical care and dictating how doctors behave. I wrote an article for the Cato Institute called Murder by Medicare, which talks about how allocation of resources by Medicare and their choices of what to fund and what not to fund actually promotes an environment that encourages death at an earlier age. Because all of this nutritional information we know about is not being covered or encouraged to be given by Medicare. It's considered quackery. And I've represented physicians before the Social Security Administration, and they were brought to task not because they charged for the advice, they gave the advice out for free. And they were, that was called a Medicare abuse. They abused a Medicare patient by not giving them the the Medicare approved treatment.
Jonathan, and it's interesting that you went down this alley of conversation, because my question to you was going to be, do you think there's an opportunity for the FDA and the Medicare system to be overhauled, or do we need to do a private intervention? What needs to happen?
Well, that's a huge question, really. In the first instance, we do need to overhaul these systems. In the long
term, is it possible?
Yes, definitely. All these things can be done. It's just a question of political will. Most politicians, sadly, are stupid. I mean, if you can't get a job elsewhere, you become a politician. That's the typical thing.
Sign me up.
True. That's not always true. Many people are motivated for great reasons to get into politics. If they have sincerity and that's their motivation, great. But a lot of them are charlatans. And a lot of them couldn't care less about whether it's going to help people or not. That's what shocks me, shocks Cheryl, when we go on Capitol Hill. We go and meet these guys, and my goodness, you couldn't keep their attention span for more than a fraction of a second. They just did not care. They couldn't care less. And that's not true of all of them. It's true of a good number of them, however. And it's just not their thing. They don't care whether you die at 79 or you die at 102. Couldn't care less. And you know, but when people unite like they can with this statement and signing it, if that poses a political threat. In other words, even if you don't want to pay attention to the needs of the American people, if you read that statement and you see that the number of people who've endorsed it, you're suddenly going to say, I've got to do something about this.
1 million people is a number that moves the needle?
Not necessarily 1 million, but 1 million will. So maybe 100,000 will. But 1 million, if we can get 1 million signatures, that is momentous, because they know that for 1 million people to sign, there've got to be at least 10 times that number that are sympathetic to the same outcomes, you know, in the same position. So it's a powerful way to get politicians' attention, is to show, you know, there are two ways of getting a politician's attention. One is to donate a huge sum of money. And as a committee of one, you can then get there and be an audience, right? Or you can show that a huge percentage of their constituency wants something done. They oftentimes move snail-like, you know, and they have to be motivated. And unfortunately, electroshock therapy is not allowed to be used on members of Congress, but that they need to have like a cattle prod type of approach to get them to move. And if we, you know, and one thing that can help them do that is to see that a whole bunch of people are anxious to see them do something, because they're always running for office. They're always running for office.
Term limits. Okay, I'm gonna try something risky here. Marilyn, you have 41 seconds. Go.
Why is that risky? Hi, Jonathan. Love hearing you speak. Say, I have an organization that I love. It's called Raw Farms. I've been getting all kinds of organic food and dairy from them. And the manufacturers of food for the last 100 years have tried to remove all raw dairy from the markets. If there's a way you could help these people, right now they are getting attacked again by the FDA. They continually get attacked by them. And I heard them proclaim that they're not going to back down. They're being told right now that there's E. coli from their products in 3 states in 9 individuals, and they said it's absolutely false. They said they don't want to back down. They're not, because they test their own products. They have their employees. There's been nothing in their actual company at all saying there's anything about E. coli. Is there a way you could help them? It's called Raw Farms is the name of the company.
Yeah, in fact, I did something years ago and probably be wise to take it up again. There is a solution to this problem. So the argument on the federal level has been, oh my goodness, raw milk is, you know, the equivalent of drinking strontium, you know, a radioactive substance, as if we have not, since virtually the beginning of mankind and husbandry of animals, not consumed milk. The argument is wrong, because ordinarily, as long as the animal is well maintained, the milk, as long as it's fresh and kept refrigerated, will ordinarily be okay. However, yes, there are instances when milk, whether pasteurized or not, will have salmonella. Every year, pasteurized milk, we have thousands of people who suffer from salmonella toxicity, because the milk, for one reason or another, gets contaminated. But it's not because it was pasteurized, because all the milk we're talking about is pasteurized. You rarely hear about raw milk having that circumstance. However, it's possible. And it would also be possible to have E. coli bacteria in pasteurized milk as well as raw milk at the point of sale. So how do you solve this problem? Well, guess what? So I told the FDA, gave the facts are these. It's not just limited to pasteurized milk or raw milk. It's also present in pasteurized milk. Here is all the incidents of salmonella every year, year after year after year after year after year. It's all pasteurized milk. So pasteurization is not going to ensure a person that they won't get salmonella from milk. Now, what we can do that will completely eliminate any risk to a consumer is educate them. We can put a mandatory labeling requirement that says that there is a possibility that milk may contain salmonella. It may also contain other bacteriological elements that might be harmful to you if you have a compromised immune system or if you're otherwise vulnerable to these things. And to combat that, you can do self-pasteurization. You can boil the milk at this temperature for this period of time before you consume it, and that is a protective step that you can take. So full disclosure with that labeling should be sufficient. So you petition the FDA to do that, and then what you're basically doing is eliminating the big dairy argument that people are blindsided getting unpasteurized milk and suffering from salmonella, because you're notifying them up front that salmonella is possible, and in order to reduce the risk of it, you should boil it, and for this period of time. And I forget it's a short period of time you boil it on the stove, and at a certain temperature, and then it kills all of the salmonella.
Right now it's like 140 to 160 for 15 minutes.
Okay.
But
So yeah,
I'll pass that along.
Thank you, Marilyn. You're the bomb. And Tom Chenault says that you're a great woman. Zach, we're going to give you a couple seconds here because we've already encroached on Jonathan's time enough. Zach, go ahead. What do you got?
Thank you. Wow. What wonderful, empowering, eloquently expressed our health rights. This knowledge has helped me. Thank you, Jonathan Emord. You're wonderful, because you empower us, you inform us, and I just want you to know that Dr. Wallach, by you helping him, you're saving lives too, because my wife spoke up, well informed and empowered. She had 7 doctors try to convince her that she was going to die and she didn't have chemo after being diagnosed with white cell clear cancer of the ovaries. But she stood up for her rights because of people like you and Dr. Wallach. People are alive. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Dr. Wallach is incredible. I think it would be interesting to try to quantify the number of people over his long career that he had guided to better health. He's probably saved literally tens of thousands, if not more, people's lives because of his nutritional recommendations. I mean, all those, he spent 364 of 365 days a year for decade after decade, giving health lectures all across the United States. People would think, gee, only a person who would be paid millions and millions of dollars would sacrifice himself to that extent. And Dr. Wallach did it for zilch. You'd have to pay to fly him there and put him up for the night. But he didn't profit off of this. He did this. This is a labor of love and sacrifice on his part. He truly wanted to transform the health of the American people. That's one of the things that drove me to have such great respect for him, is that he, there's no one like Dr. Wallach. He was passionately committed to this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and will be forever. And the changes that have taken place, it is likely that most people would not understand the cancer risk reduction effects of selenium, the necessity for 90 nutrients in addition to just a standard multivitamin, to have 90 essential nutrients, that they were essential. His whole development of the nutritional profile based on comparative pathology, studying animals in the first instance as a vet, being in the wilds of Africa with Marlon Perkins, and having to come up with solutions when they lacked the drugs available, and then developing nutritional interventions, and then finding through comparative pathology, all of those autopsies that he performed on people, that there were commonalities between the diseases in certain animals and those of people, and that the treatments that he had developed for the animals might well affect the same results in people, then testing that out and establishing it. I mean, everything his whole life was directed in this way of thinking ever since he cured his own Tourette's with eating the pellets that were to be available with all the nutrients in them for the bovine, the cows on his farm. I mean, here he is, a little kid, and he's trying to figure out, well, why is it that when I eat these pellets, it's curative? And then he researches this on his own. The other thing was, anybody who saw his lectures over the years realized he just really researched everything. All of his books, he researched everything, and he's obsessed with it. And it's because this was his passion, his purpose on this earth, I think, was blessed to be one who would convey this information. And he did it so very well. The whole company, Longevity, exists only because, in my view, because of Dr. Wallach. He was the driving force behind the company and built it into an empire, not for his own personal benefit, but for the benefit of everybody else. All these other companies fail mostly because the motivation really is personal wealth. And so they don't really care that much. Wallach came in from the other side. And unfortunately, I think he sacrificed so much, he's not been paid what he should be paid for the miraculous benefits that he's conveyed to so many people. But that was his choice. And because of it, we benefited. So in other words, we've all been enriched at his expense. But that is the only way I think he could have lived, because he was driven by this. It was a passion for all his life. It drove him into becoming a vet, and then in his fight over position that he had at Emory, I think, or was it Emory?
At the Yerkes, they renamed it, by the way, at Emory. Yes,
and that whole thing is just a tribute to him, because he maintained his principles even when it meant that he would lose his job. And then when he lost his job, he still stuck to that. And then his whole life has been driven by it. But it was driven by it before he even approached that. I mean, that was the boldness of somebody who had discovered that, there was a cure. I forget what was the condition. It was
cystic fibrosis.
Cystic fibrosis. Right. Yeah. And was it selenium? That was the
selenium for that, and selenium for congestive heart failure. Oh, excuse me. Selenium for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy.
Yeah. So of course they said he was a nut, because they all thought that these things were genetic, and they had no explanation for it. That's why they said it was genetic. But they just wouldn't listen to a young man who had a bold idea, but who had a lot of evidence to support his position and had a lot of proof in these autopsies. And they just dismissed him out of hand because he was threatening their comfort zone. They had developed their own research funding and everything from this whole false paradigm. It's the same way with cancer. We got this paradigm of cut, poison, and burn. I was in a movie years and years ago called Cut, Poison, and Burn. And
that's right. I did see.
Yeah, I look completely different, I know. But it's sad. But the reality is, that whole paradigm is barbaric. It's barbaric to think in the 21st century that we still treat a disease like cancer with these primitive modalities of bombarding your body with toxic substances that in and of themselves could kill you, and wiping out your whole immune system on the theory that somehow that taking away the cancer and good cells is somehow going to result in your rejuvenation, and then giving you a bone marrow transplant or doing something heroic at the end. I mean, all these things are, it's just, we seem to be not far away from when in the Civil War, soldiers were brought into the medical tents and they were amputated with a little whiskey down their throat, and then they would saw off a leg or an arm or whatever. We're still in this very primitive mode, and cancer treatment is much like that.
Jonathan, we're gonna allow Keely to unmute herself and ask a question. Keely is gonna keep it very brief. Also, Jonathan, just every time you speak, every time a sentence comes out of your mouth, different questions pop in my head, but we can't. So I'm just gonna let Keely go right ahead. What's your question?
Hi, Jonathan. First and foremost, I want to thank you for being a patriot on behalf of humanity, because God sent the right warrior to come along, what I call Dr. Wallach, the modern day Moses. And that feat that you've been fighting has been a gift to all of us. So your life's work, I know it's a calling, and because you've been blazing that trail for the greater good, and we do truly honor you and thank you. So in appreciation of all that, given the last 5 years that we have experienced, given all of this medical stuff happening, there's not a 3-letter agency that really has any credibility in reference to the government, given the fact that the government did not protect us according to the rights that were given to us by God. How is it, and what is your perspective on really restoring sovereignty and trust and an ethical ground to these health and governance systems, considered that the dysfunction that they live with is one that they're comfortable with?
So I may be a fool, but I am an optimist. And I really, at heart, I am an optimist. I do believe that the principles that underlie the Constitution and the unique nature of our republic in defense of individual liberty and sovereignty is so profound that we will ultimately return to the, as Abraham Lincoln put it, the better angels of our nature. That when we're tempted to go off on a fancy of socialism or some ridiculous system that is invariably a failure, we learn quickly that we're burnt. We're burnt by it, that we lose our rights, that there's great harm that comes to us economically, personally, and it threatens the future of coming generations. When those circumstances arise, when for some reason a pandemic leads us into a mental fog that causes us to think that we're in dire straits and there has to be some dramatic thing tried, or there's a Great Depression that leads us in that direction, as it did in the Great Depression, bringing socialism here, that it leads us to confront, when we go down that path, the horrors that are associated with systems of centralized government control that deprive us of our freedom. And what we have always is this original history. That's why the socialists so desperately tried to destroy our original history by, for example, saying that the country was not created in 1776, but was created in the Jamestown colony in 1617. And that we were founded on slavery, when in point of fact, we were founded on principles of liberty. Yes, we had slavery in this country. And yes, we did largely defeat the institution of slavery, but even before the Civil War, when the Constitution itself was coming about, the founding fathers were committed to ending slavery. They included a provision in the Constitution to end the fugitive slave trade, which at the time they created that provision was the principal means by which slaves were brought to America. And by the way, there were not only black slaves in America, there were white slaves in America. That's the untold story. There were Irish slaves in America. And in fact, the Irish slaves came from a penal colony. They were actually not a penal colony, but they were from Oliver Cromwell's defeat of the Irish in England. And they were the cheapest on the auction block because they didn't have to pay the costs of bringing them from Africa, and they were captives.
Well, Jonathan, I tell a story, and I don't know if you're making a distinction between slaves, and that's why I said that we wanted to have this conversation later. I don't know if you're making a distinction between slavery and indentured servitude.
Yeah, I don't think there really is at the time. So in other words, at the time, so in 1614, in the Jamestown colony, there was a slave, Anthony, I forget his last name, doggone it. He took the name of his slave owner. He was black, happened to be black, although at the time, most of the people who were indentured servants, he was an indentured servant, but treated like a slave. and so were the whites. There were a majority of whites in the colony at that time were indentured servants. But this Anthony Johnson, so he won his master's approval for to be set free. So he was allowed to have his indenture terminated, and he became free. He then bought 20 acres of Virginia farmland, and he enslaved 12 black people. He could have had white people too, but most of them were still under the control of the original founders of the Jamestown colony, and created his own profitable farm from that. But he maintained the institution of slavery. The point was that was the way agriculture was largely done at the time. By the time of the Civil War in 1860, one of the largest slave owners in Louisiana was Antoine Dubuclet. Antoine Dubuclet was black, and he had over 200 black slaves under him. He was a manumitted black slave. So the whole thing's so complicated because the institution of slavery was such a part of the economy. And by the way, Antoine Dubuclet married a white woman, and you would think, based on popular lore, that would have been scandalous, but it was not, because he was so wealthy from his massive holdings. He was accepted into the aristocracy in Louisiana, and when he married a white woman, it was just considered passé. I mean, that's
in Black's Law Dictionary would call a different term for white anyway.
Right. But it's a complicated thing, and really the whole notion of so by the time of the Civil War, there were roughly 4 million black slaves. There were a very small number of white slaves. There was something maybe 150, 200,000 white slaves in all of the country, but there were 4 million black slaves, and that largely it became a segregated institution. Slavery did, starting with Bacon's Rebellion in Virginia, when you had a slave uprising. And so what they did is they created the overseer type of system where they would choose. You were fearful as a slave owner that the slaves might have a revolution and kill you. So you would hire overseers, and they began to distinguish based on race. So they would hire white overseers over black slaves. And this inculcated this whole racist element that was principally not present in the Jamestown colony, but it became a feature of slavery. By the time of the Civil War, it was there, obviously. And, so anyway, but
I tell a story, to your point, in the smokehouses when they were curing the tobacco, it was written, one of these slave owners had said, why do you put the Irish guy in the smokehouse? And he said, because I didn't want to waste a good N-word.
Right. And actually in Barbados, in the sugar cane fields, it was notorious that, if you worked the sugar cane, because it was just brutal out there in the sun, it was also very, very labor intensive, and people would die in the fields. And there was a preference for the Irish slave because it was cheaper. So if you lost one, you could afford it more than if you lost a black slave. So you put the black slave in, you still see them in the fields, but there were far less of them by preference in favor of Irish slaves. But it's an economic institution. It's horrible. Slavery is absolutely horrific, and we're all at liberty. But the point is that when you create it in a modern political sense, you try to make it into a racist construct, you lose the historicity, the truth of the history.
And I follow you, and I do follow you, and I do think that it's difficult to put our glasses on, or view things from, some things are universal over time. You wouldn't David is going to arbitrate between the two, or Solomon's going to arbitrate between the two women, and one woman's going to say cut the baby in half. Some things are universal, right? but we have really enjoyed having you on Daily with Doc. I know that people's minds must be blown right now. Tom Chenault says, Jonathan, you and Doc were a great team, and all these people on YouTube are saying so many things. Olga saying, children sold in the markets along the animals to look after the animals. They still exist in the Middle East. Thanks, Mr. Emord, and et cetera, and et cetera. Ruth Ellen, is there something that you'd like to say to Jonathan before we part?
Yes, I would. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for coming on and sharing the information that you've shared and giving us the link to the Arizona papers. Or I posted it everywhere because it is our passion to be able to speak freely about helping and healing ourselves. And I have no words for my gratitude for what you do and for you as a person. I've met you in person several times, and you're a very good, kind-hearted man. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank all of you for what you do, because you really are the hands and feet of Dr. Wallach. I think that that essential nutritional message would never have reached as many people as it has all over the world without this massive infusion of people who are willing day in and day out to promote a business that really, as I say, is more about the health and welfare of the people of the world than it is about the profitability of any one man or one person. Dr. Wallach is an amazing character, and I think we all have a rightful deep debt of gratitude to him for what he has done. It's been my pleasure to have represented him over the years and to have fought many a legal battle on his behalf. And fortunately, we've won many battles. But those battles are just a few in the big scheme of things. We're going to have to keep fighting for our liberties for the rest of our lives and for our children's lives and forever. As you know, George Washington put it, each new generation will have to rekindle the sacred fire of liberty, or it will be extinguished. And that's certainly the case. It has been proven over again and again. And we have liberty only because we have the benefit of those who have fought and died for it. And we will only have it in future if people will continue to fight and die for it.
Agreed.
Amazing, Jonathan. I know you didn't expect that you would be here this long with us, and if I had my way, we'd probably be here hours more, because we just scratched the surface of the illustrious career that you've had and continue to have, and the amount of body of work that you do on behalf of the American people, and we really appreciate you. And I didn't even get to ask you a political question, although you did a really good job weaving in all the answers I really wanted to know about selenium and your methodology and how much time it took and tons of other things. But I really wanted to know what made you run for Senate. I don't know if you got a couple seconds to kind of tell us that, but.
Well, sure. So in 2024, I thought, based on where we were as a country, that if we had another 4 years equivalent to what Joe Biden had given us, that very clearly our nation would not survive. And so, because I'm driven by a love of the Constitution and the founding principles of this country, I knew it would be a huge sacrifice, and it was a big one for my family. But I did it because I thought it was necessary. I would never, to tell you the truth, the last thing in the world I would ever want to be is a politician. But in a time of crisis, that is the best thing to be, because if your country is going to go to hell in a handbasket, you had better get there fast enough before it actually gets to hell. And that means you got to get in the position of being able to hold that basket. But as it turns out, it's actually better for my family and for me that I was not elected to the United States Senate. And the reason is that had I been elected there, my beautiful daughter, who's now at the Tisch Academy or Tisch Academy of Arts or whatever it's called, School of Arts at New York University, and my son, who's entering George Mason University as a D1. So he's going to there because it's a D1 tennis school. And a lot of our extended family that needed us would have had to have suffered greatly, because it's just, frankly, it
doesn't pay well.
It doesn't, and it's cost.
Okay.
It's a chronic cost. I mean, I spent $1 million of my own resources running for the U.S. Senate. That was a major sacrifice, and I did it willingly, and so did my wife and my kids, because we all share this love of the Constitution. It wasn't so. Unlike most politicians, as I say, most politicians are running because they can't do anything else. I was leaving something that I did very well, and had a lot of clients and a lot of success to save the country. And I thought it was essential. I would never do it if I didn't think it was essential. But fortunately, we have not gone down that path. We didn't continue the Biden administration's destruction of this nation. We've started the reversal of that. I believe in the end of this year, we're going to see some major uptick in the economy. But what we have seen is that we no longer have an open border. We no longer have a situation where the cartels are destroying the cities in this country with massive crime, sex trafficking, drug trafficking. And we no longer have a situation where those who are engaged in pillaging this nation in political positions of power are doing it without having to watch their back. Many of them are being prosecuted. We have a situation where justice is being reestablished. I just wished that, we had gotten there sooner, because unfortunately, 4 years of what has happened to this country under Joe Biden is leaving a legacy that is going to last generations. There are people who have, countless Americans have had their family members or lives taken as a result of people here who had criminal backgrounds, who were not vetted, just allowed straight in the country. I went to the border. You can probably still see the videos on YouTube. I went to the border. I met with the Border Patrol. I went on a patrol of the San Diego sector, and I saw firsthand how they were just coming through into this country, no restriction whatsoever. They were taking them to tents where they were giving them a free ride into this country, literally connecting them with NGOs that were paying for their airfare, bus traffic, go anywhere in the United States without ever having to become an American citizen. Some 20 million Americans 20 million people are here in this country who've never been asked to pledge allegiance to the United States, never been asked to do anything other than accept a welfare check, and who've never been asked to serve their country if necessary to save it, because this is not their country. And there are many.
Jonathan, there's good and bad in every administration. I can remember incessant buses dropping off at different places in New York. And then when it became a problem in New York, the buses would drop off in New Jersey, and then they take the train in New York.
Yeah.
It was an incessant flow.
It's insane.
I couldn't tell you how long. It was kind of odd. It was kind of odd.
Yeah, if you turn the wealth and the privilege of being an American over to the rest of the world, you shouldn't be surprised when your destruction follows. And these things are among the things that motivated me to get involved, because I thought, if I don't get involved with this thing, I'm going to really regret when I'm ready to pack it in and go on to the next level that I hadn't tried to do it. So trying to do it was important for me, mentally and otherwise. I mean, now I look back at it, I say, I'm glad that I sacrificed in order to try to save my country. Dr. Wallach served in the military. I always seem to just miss that by age. When I was at the University of Illinois, my roommate worked for the newspaper, and it's a large college, 65,000 students. And on April Fool's Day, and I never knew what day it was or time, and it was on April Fool's Day, and he set my alarm real early in the morning, so I'd wake up, super early, and then he said, "Emord, look at the paper," and I picked up the paper, and it was a April Fool's joke in the paper, but it looked real, and it said Reagan calls for 60,000 troops to go to El Salvador, and it shows these troops landing on a beachhead, and I thought, wow, we're going to war. So I picked up the phone. I called my dad, who was in the military for 38 years. And I said, what service should I go into, Dad, for this war in El Salvador? And he said, what are you talking about? There's been no war in El Salvador. And I said, yeah, Dad, look at the newspaper. I said, what should I go into? He said, well, look, don't be a fool. Don't put your life in direct harm's way. Will you the best thing you can do is go into the Air Force, or worse, go into the Navy. So I said, all right. So then I went over to the recruiting station on the campus. And I walk in there, and somebody takes a picture of me. I thought, that's weird. And I go over to the recruiting officer. I get in there and sit down at the desk. And he said, okay, well, you got to fill out these forms, and we can get you into the ROTC program here at the university. I said, I don't want to go through ROTC. I want to go to El Salvador and fight whatever the communists are down there. And he said, what are you talking about, El Salvador? There's no war in El Salvador. And then it dawned on me, uh-oh. And then they called me the biggest fool on campus. They had me in the newspaper.
They took the picture. That's great.
Biggest idiot. Went to volunteer for.
That's great. That's great. You just offended Andy, a Navy man, and who else we have that's a Navy? Yvonne's Navy.
My dad's view, he was in the Air Force, so he was in the Navy actually in the beginning. He was in the Navy, then he was recommissioned in the Army Air Corps, and then the Army Air Corps became the Air Force, and then he was in the Air Force. That picture you see right there, that's my dad. He fought under the pseudonym Tommy Reardon.
That's your dad?
My dad. He fought 61 professional.
I know who he is.
There you go. So he was an incredibly strong and fantastic.
Whoa.
But he was the boxing coach for the Air Force. But he loved the Air Force, and he wanted me to go if I went in, he wanted me to go into the Air Force first, and then if not that, then the Navy. But he didn't. His brother had been at Bougainville in World War II and was blown apart in the Marines. And then he came back to the States and was stitched together, and then he insisted on re-enlisting, went back and fought in World War II again, was blown up again somewhere. But he didn't want that same fate, I think, for his son. So anyway, he had a bad idea about the Marines and the Army from that. But
yeah, I gathered he might. Andy, do you want to chime in?
Go ahead.
Oh, I didn't. Oh, okay. Andy gets a chance. Thank you. You're very, very gracious. You were speaking earlier about the founding fathers, and I love the term brilliant, which represents light. And they truly, as men, are brilliant. Their command of the English language. And in that, the command and the understanding about human behavior, especially with regards about power, and how the Constitution was created and then incorporated a Bill of Rights to protect us from the very government Constitution created. So it was the people that were there with the intent. My question is this: is there currently anyone in the judiciary, in particular in the Supreme Court, that is even close to the brilliance of our founding fathers that you know of?
Well, that's a tall order, I think.
Leave it to me. Yeah, leave it to me. Yeah.
I think there are brilliant justices on the Supreme Court, some not so.
Gorsuch?
But I think Gorsuch is great. I think They're very intelligent people. I just there are people outside of the Supreme Court that I think are right up there. There's Phil Hamburger, who wrote the book "Is the Administrative State Constitutional?" or something like that, and he's a genius, I think. And there are certain other people. I think Paul Clement, who was a former Solicitor General of the United States and who argued the Obamacare case before the Supreme Court. I think he's one of the most articulate and brilliant minds in the law. But to your point, if you study the words of the founding fathers, you come away with that impression that you have, that these people were brilliant.
Brilliant.
And they really were a select group that it's remarkable. It's actually divine, I think, that they were.
It is truly God-given.
And so on the issue of power, George Washington said, "Let there be no change by usurpation." He was referring to changing the Constitution. "Let there be no change by usurpation, for though in one instance it may be an instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed." Always a remarkable statement. Jefferson said, "I am not a friend to a very energetic government. It is always oppressive." They were aware that the product of their hands and minds, the Constitution of the United States, was a precarious thing. James Madison referred to it as a mere parchment barrier. That only if people who were in power respected the Constitution's limits on their power could the republic be maintained. But if they didn't respect those limits, then we would be destroyed. And so Jefferson thought that you had to bleed the tree of liberty, he said, every 14 years. In other words, have a revolution in the United States every 14 years to restore the balance of power in favor of individual liberty, because people would invariably seize positions of power, be elected to office, and would use it for their own self-interest. So it's always the issue, whether we are allowing those that represent us to assume power beyond the Constitution's limits, risking the loss of the republic. And we have, it's interesting, the Constitution prevents the states and localities from changing from a Republican form of government. The Constitution itself guarantees a Republican form of government in the states and localities. Not only that, the Constitution requires an oath to support the Constitution by every elected officer, whether in the federal government or in the states. So technically speaking, someone like Ilhan Omar or AOC, who are socialists, self-avowed socialists, are ineligible to be seated in Congress if you abide by the Constitution, because they can't truthfully swear the constitutionally required oath to support the Constitution, because they're on public record as favoring its destruction. The American Socialist Party believes in the destruction of the Constitution. And so, in other words, if we had kept ourselves aligned with the founding fathers, we wouldn't have had individuals like that who could vote. They would be potentially elected, but they couldn't be seated. They couldn't swear that oath. That oath was designed. There's some 13 provisions of the Constitution that carry with it restrictions to ensure the perpetuation of the Republican form of government. So we can never become, it's not just that, President Trump said, America will never be a socialist nation. We will never, the people will not agree to it. Well, in fact, the Constitution of the United States forbids it, because it requires adherence to the Republican form of government.
We are listening to brilliance right now.
Well, yeah, the guy.
Thank you.
The guy definitely. His readers are always leaders. He is definitely a leader. and we appreciate you being here, Jonathan.
Well,
And
everybody's got to go. I ruined your whole afternoon.
On the
no,
contrary,
man, not at all. You've enlightened our afternoon and given us all some things to think about and appreciate. So we do appreciate everything that you've said. And we have on the screen our good friend Jonathan Emord. If you are not on the screen, do show him some appreciation because we do appreciate that you were here with us today. And we have our good friend and the co-executive producer Ruth Ellen Sanchez, who is manning the team as Becca has taken a day or two off. I'm Coach AJ on the screen. We have Phyllis and Andy Anderson, who are pioneers in longevity. We've known Jonathan for a year or two. And we have Marilyn Pizzera Spear, who is typing away, trying to keep up with all this constitutional wisdom that has been espoused today. And we have Mary, who is bringing questions and taming people from trying to take over the show with all of their wild questions. And speaking of tame and wild, we have our own personal zoologist, Albert down in South Africa, who for breakfast wrestles lions. So we are proud that Albert is with us today. And all of you who are watching out on Rumble and Facebook and YouTube, we thank you very much. And Ruth Ellen, take us out.
Thank you, everybody. Also, if you were referred to this program by anybody, please make sure to get back with them, as they will be your primary support. If you have questions, you can email us at questions@dailywoodsdoc.com. Also, we have a phone team, so you could speak to a certified holistic health coach, and that is 855-949-3377. Also, per the FDA, this program was for educational purposes only, not meant to treat, diagnose, cure any diseases. And we just want to thank Jonathan, our favorite constitutional lawyer. And Jonathan, my son would love to talk to you because he is a constitutionalist at his true core. So thank you, everyone, and have a beautiful day. And always remember to be kind. Be kind, because you don't know what somebody is going through. And sometimes you will never know. So just be good. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you, Jonathan.
This program is for educational purposes only. The content is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any diseases, nor is it intended to take the place of your primary care physician. The statements in this program have not been evaluated by the FDA. Testimonials are shared as individual experiences of the individual. Results vary and may not be typical. We do not make any claims regarding health or income. As an empowered individual, you do have options available. We are honored to continue to share the teachings of a founding father of the science of epigenetics, Dr. Joel Wallach, Bachelor of Science in Plant and Soil Sciences, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, 4 postdoctorates in pathology, naturopathic doctor. is for educational purposes only. The content is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any diseases, nor is it intended to take the place of your primary care physician. The statements in this program have not been evaluated by the FDA. Testimonials are shared as individual experiences of the individual. Results vary and may not be typical. We do not make any claims regarding health or income. As an empowered individual, you do have options available. We are honored to continue to share the teachings of a founding father of the science of epigenetics, Dr. Joel Wallach, Bachelor of Science in Plant and Soil Sciences, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, 4 postdoctorates in pathology, naturopathic doctor. This program is for educational purposes only. The content is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any diseases, nor is it intended to take the place of your primary care physician. The statements in this program have not been evaluated